Good morning, everybody. Super excited about the number of participants today. We have about 68 thus far. We've been working, I'm Matt Myers, Lake County with Lake County Administrator's Office. Today, joined by Don Davis from the Bronner Group, Matt from the Bronner Group, and Patrice Sutton from the Lake County Finance Department. She's the Chief Financial Officer for Lake County. We have been working hard since the new guidance came out on September 2nd. We followed up on September 11th with our revised guidelines, and today is a session dedicated to some of those changes in addition to what we're kind of expecting for Lake County for the submittal, and also give an opportunity for everybody to ask their questions as it relates to their submittal. A couple quick housekeeping items is, can we use the chat for any questions? Somebody will be monitoring that. And then I think one last thing I'll say is, can everybody that has submitted already prior to September 11th, can they please, if you haven't already, let us know if you want us to continue to review that submittal, or if you would like to rescind that submittal and resubmit based on the new guidelines. We'll probably end up saying that again at some point during the session, but with that, I'll introduce Don Davis, who will take it from here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Patrice. Really appreciate it. Thank everybody for being here. I'll even start off by saying I apologize a little bit for the change in the payroll guidance, but unfortunately, Treasury was very unclear originally on the payroll guidance, and finally, September 2nd, they clarified. So I think that's going to be to everybody's benefit and really makes it much more clear. Today, we want to provide guidance on CRF funding requirements, eligible expenses, and particularly focused on the payroll issue, the reimbursement process, a little bit on reporting and record retention, and then resources for questions. As we move through the presentation, if you have a question, want to put it in the chat. If possible, we'll address it at the time. If not, we'll address it towards the end. And the other thing is, please mute your microphone unless you're presenting at the time. One thing, just kind of big picture, I want to mention is federal legislation. Congress has been negotiating, as you know, probably since July on a new bill. The hope was that they would have it wrapped up prior to the August recess, then immediately after the August recess. Right now, we don't think it will take place until after the November election. And we really can't predict what the results will be. I mean, there's been talk on extending deadlines, more funding for municipalities. And again, it's just unclear with what's going on in DC, if they will reach agreement and what that will contain. But it is something we're monitoring, and we'll make sure we keep you informed on. The big thing we want to talk about today too is that, as I mentioned before, Treasury provided an update on their guidance back on September 2nd. It really helped a lot. There was a lot of ambiguity, contradictions even in the guidance. Again, Bronner, the firm I work for, has been advising Lake County, and the thing we don't want to see happen is money going out and then having to be reclaimed and paid back, because again, you just don't want to lose that money. So we're trying to do it the right way up front. They really help clarify how to treat public safety and public health employees, and we'll talk about details there in a minute. And then also kind of other employees, how to deal with the payroll expenses. One other one, and I don't know if we have schools here, but they also really simplified how funding for schools will take place. And basically, in the Treasury September 2nd guidance said there's no need for documentation of expenses, up to $500 per student. So with Lake County, what they're going to be looking for is a certified copy of enrollment. The other thing mentioning here is schools will need to monitor their total funding for CRF funds to see where that threshold is met. You're receiving CRF funds from the state of Illinois. You may have other places you're receiving them from. So again, just want to make sure that that's being monitored overall. But like I say, really simplifies the process overall. We still want to encourage people to maximize the FEMA funding. The little scenario we provide here is two different ways. The first way, there's just kind of like the overlap. You're not submitting to FEMA, and the total reimbursed amount's $20,000. The flip side is, in this scenario, if you use CRF match to pay for the FEMA public assistance match, it really generates more income for you. It can go up to $27,500 in this scenario. So again, definitely think about getting your FEMA submission in. Additionally, FEMA just changed some of their guidance for public assistance. So please stay on top of that. Again, I think it was beneficial for local governments. Briefly, high level, CRF funds are being used a lot of different ways. They're being used for programs with shelter, with food, with small business assistance. The subset we're talking about today is financial assistance to local governments. There's a lot of thought given to kind of like how to allocate the funding. And so there's different allocations based on per capita for either municipality or people in township. And again, this is reflected here. And like I say, reflects the total dollar amount being given out. I think everybody's familiar with it, but just want to do a quick recap on the key issues with CRF requirements. First thing, it must be COVID-19 related. Second, it cannot supplant existing budgeted expenses. And third, it must be incurred between March 1st and December 30th, 2020. Obviously, these all get a little bit more tricky when you kind of get into details. Second of all, 4 key points from the Treasury guidance kind of can't determine who to fund, or can determine who to fund and the amount of funding. But for local governments, you have the ability to kind of spend the money as you see fit according to the guidelines. The county's role is more ensuring compliance. One big one there is governments cannot use funds to make up for lost revenue. There's hope that that will change, but no telling for sure, so don't plan on that. The other one is the benefits from CRF cannot be duplicated. Did have one question come in regarding will today's PowerPoint be published, and yes, it will. And it also is being recorded, from what I understand. So have that. Eligible expenses, I'm not going to read through these, but these are the standard eligible expenses. Please take a look at them. Again, sometimes you may need to read the details. It gets a little confusing sometimes by, what do they mean by public health expenses or medical expenses. So please take a look deeper at those definitions as needed. Want to hit a little bit more detail, non-allowable expenditures. So something that's not COVID-19 related is not eligible. Revenue shortfall, damages covered by insurance, any expenses that are to be reimbursed from any other federal or state program, reimbursement to donors for donated items or services, severance pay, legal settlements, payroll or benefits for people who were not substantially dedicated, substantially different duties. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a second. And then bonuses or incentives, permanent salary increases are not eligible. I want to move on now to the new guidance on eligible payroll costs. So again, September 2nd, this guidance went out. We provided a link at the end, by the way, for this document and other documents. And it really helped clarify what's eligible for public safety, public health employees, other government employees doing substantially different duties, administrative leave, and then also benefits. So the first one, and I know this will be very good news for municipalities with police forces, it clarified public health and public safety, what is considered substantially dedicated. So bottom line, payroll costs are 100% eligible from March 1st to December 30th, 2020. You do not need to document how the time was spent. So you don't have to say this patrolman was going out and working with somebody who has COVID or doing traffic stops and whatever that might be. Local governments will need to provide payroll records to document the costs. And we'll talk a little more about that in a minute. The one exception here is to the assumption of being substantially dedicated is if your local government chief executive determines that people were not substantially dedicated. So it would be up to that person to make that decision. But like I say, otherwise, people are presumed to be substantially dedicated. A little further here, public safety employees are defined as police officers, sheriffs and deputy sheriffs, firefighters, emergency medical responders, correctional officers. And then this is one that gets a little more tricky. Those who directly support such employees, such as dispatchers and supervisory personnel. Our interpretation, that means somebody like the police chief is a supervisory personnel. Again, obviously up there they mentioned sheriffs who are in that type of role too. So it gets a quick example. If you have maintenance workers working in the police department, that would not count as a public safety employee. Public health employees, and I will say this is their language is a little convoluted in my opinion, but employees involved in providing medical or other health services to patients and supervisory personnel, including medical staff assigned to schools, prisons, and other institutions. Support services such as laboratory techs and employees for public health departments directly engaged in public health related matters. One note, this can include school nurses. And again, the other part here just to call out, because it's been asked about, is like maintenance workers who are cleaning up a facility would not be considered public health. There was a question regarding could security employees in a library district be considered public safety? And honestly, let me look at that closer. I should make a note and we'll get some sort of answer for you on that. So here's eligible payroll expenses for non-public safety, public health people. And the issue here, there's two tests really, substantially dedicated and substantially different. We have a nice little graph also that will kind of help. So the issue is if people spent more than 51% of their time working on COVID-related work, then 100% of their time for that payroll period can be reimbursed. If they spend less than 51% of their time working on COVID-related, then those specific hours can be reimbursed. So again, 51% threshold. I will say that this is something that we decided on to call it 51%. The language actually just says substantially dedicated and did not define it any closer. We feel that we're safe with using 51%. In these cases, governments need to provide payroll records and document how the time was spent on substantially different activities from their normal job duties. And these duties must relate to COVID-19. One example that was called out in the guidance even was telework, performing the same job duties with preventive measures in place are not considered substantial different duties. We will kind of go into that in a little more detail. There is a question here about have the initial round reimbursements been sent out or put on hold. Right now they're on hold. What we're asking, and Matt mentioned at the beginning, and is to please notify there's an email address if you want to keep your current submission in, or if you would like to retract it and use this new guidance. Now I can read all this. This is the definition substantially different coming from the Treasury FAQ. And again, one of the things it calls out is just it must be due entirely to the COVID-19 public health emergency. Again, substantially different. They provide a few examples here. And again, not substantially different if it's just different location or through a different manner. And I'm looking back. I see a question, are CSOs included in the public safety group? And I'm not sure what the C stands for. I imagine the SO would be security officers. And I would say we can clarify that. If you can type in, though, what that stands for, I'd appreciate it. So here's some examples of how to think about substantially different duties for the technology staff. So if you're a park district IT staff and you assist a school in setting up e-learning, that's substantially different. But if you're a park district IT staff person and you're assisting park district in setting up laptops or, say, telework, that's not substantially different. That's just part of your regular duties. Even though it's COVID related, again, it's not substantially different. Human resource staff, if you're eligible, would be if you're providing advice to local businesses on COVID-19 policies. But if you're providing advice to agency employees on COVID-19 policies, that would not be eligible because, again, it's not substantially different. Maintenance staff, if they're assigned to kind of clean a different facility than they're normally assigned, say a high-risk facility, a jail, nursing home, police station, that could be considered substantially different. But if they're just cleaning the normal workplace and it's in using different methods more often, that does not qualify. And there's a question here, if the PowerPoint will be published, emailed, or made available on the website. And I'm going to defer to Matt to answer that. Matt, I don't know if you know offhand.
We can follow up on that. We're going to send out a communication to everybody after this with the location of this recorded training, and we can also put the information in there related to the PowerPoint as well.
Okay. Thank you. There's a question came up, are records clerks and administrative assistants for police and fire included as public safety employees? And I would say not on that one. They're not really in the direct support role in the same ways that dispatchers are. So again, I would not define them that way at this point. I will say, ever so often Treasury comes out with more frequently asked questions, and that might be clarified, but again, don't want you to kind of put in something that will be taken back later. Another example here, finance staff, if you have an auditor or accountant who's assigned to administer a small business grant program, that would be considered eligible. But if they're just reviewing the program like they normally would for any other invoices coming in, that would not be eligible. So again, I hope these examples helped. I'm sure there'll be a few more out there that'll pop up, but then we'll move on. Here's a little chart we did. It shows that if more than 51% of the time, and you can see that threshold mark, the green line right through the middle of the screen. If they meet that threshold, 100% of the staff time is eligible, but you must also show somehow that was substantially different from normal duties. If it was less than 51% of the time spent, you're only able to charge for that specific time. There is a question here. The summary reimbursement spreadsheet requests a signature indicating I certify expenses were not budgeted for in the most recently approved fiscal year budget as of 3/27/2020. While payroll expenses for EMS workers were budgeted, the diversion of staff time to COVID-19 response was not. Does that meet the intent of the certification? Yes, it would. Again, so 100% of EMS workers would be eligible. Question is the measurement of time payroll to payroll? And again, yes, whatever your standard payroll period is, that's what you should utilize. I want to mention too, the issue of sick and family leave. There's been questions that popped up about what happens if somebody's sick or there was somebody in the office who's sick and they couldn't come in. And a lot of this really falls under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And frankly, I don't think government's dealt with that quite as much because it was more set up with tax credits. But the bottom line is you should follow the guidance there. It gets quite detailed on number of days that people are eligible for. But again, employees who use like their sick leave, FMLA, family, or fall under this FSCRA, as a result of COVID-related illness or COVID issues, are eligible for reimbursement, and the related benefits are eligible too. Question came up, accounts payable person being used as a purchasing coordinator for 100% COVID. I would say that qualifies because it is substantially different from their normal duties. Benefits and indirect costs. So one positive thing here too is all your eligible payroll costs, including benefits, including pension, are eligible. The pension was one in particular we were kind of concerned they would not consider. But again, we kind of provide a list here that got called out from the guidance. So it's pretty comprehensive. The only thing is indirect costs are not eligible. And I'm not sure if everybody uses indirect costs, but basically it's looking at kind of how much time is spent on accounting and HR, and oftentimes with a grant, you put in the indirect cost ratio. So that indirect costs are not eligible. Other CRF requirements. Again, I think most people are kind of familiar with these, but talk through quickly. The previous budgeted issue. So what is being looked for is things that were not budgeted or above budgeted costs, directly related to the response mitigation. The threshold Treasury uses is to say it was not accounted for in the most recently approved budget as of 3/27/2020. One thing that we looked at, and it isn't too complicated, but basically the issue of like, what happens if you spent over the budgeted amount? So if specific components of a project were added because they were deemed necessary to prevent the spread and mitigate COVID-19, those components are eligible. Another example, like if you were in the process of buying computers, so you have a budget already to buy 10 laptops for your organization. But now because of COVID and people are working from home, you need to make sure that it has the right cameras and the microphones and the right software. And it ends up costing $250 more per laptop. That delta, that extra $250 per laptop would be eligible for reimbursement. So it'd just be documenting it. So again, there can be things that are budgeted. If they go over that amount because of added cost because of COVID, that will be considered. Local governments can set up assistance programs for people, businesses, nonprofits. Again, you have the full range of kind of what's eligible. The issue here, though, is we do want people to kind of discuss it with us to make sure that if you are setting up these special initiatives and it's not just reimbursing you for your own costs, that things are set up so recipients are not duplicating benefits. Funds cannot be used to pay the government. You can't do like a municipal utility bill forgiveness program. This gets into that revenue replacement issue. There's other requirements that may need to be met, such as church-state constitutional requirements. Another thing that's important is controls are in place for the program and applicants to meet CRF requirements. I want to hit a question here, is HR employees' time learning COVID-related laws eligible? And no, that would not, because learning laws, HR requirements is part of their normal duties. So again, that would not be eligible. Question is, if we purchase laptops now for employees to be able to work from home, does that qualify for reimbursement? We did not purchase originally when COVID, because it was not in the budget and employees use their own. And yes, that is eligible. The issue, if you take the 3-part test, is it COVID related? Yes, because they're having to work from home. Is it within the time frame? And yes, it will be. And then third, are you supplanting the budget? And no, because it was not in the budget. So that's good to go. Timeframe issues. Required costs are incurred between March 1 and December 30th. Because Lake County needs to track the expenditures, report them out on a certain basis, make sure that money's being spent. The reimbursement submissions are due October 15th. So coming up about 3 weeks roughly. You can spend the money on capital improvements. I mean, it's definitely things, touchless faucets, doors, trash cans, things like that can definitely help the spread. You may have dividers to keep workers kind of separate and safe. It's fine if those improvements have a lasting value afterwards. It's reasonable and it's needed to address COVID-19. Obviously, you're not going to install touchless faucets for a 6-month period. So fine to put them in, and the value is eligible for reimbursement. One thing is like design projects for future work or purchasing equipment for future installation, we do not view as eligible because it's not in place, it's not helping immediately with COVID. The other thing here is just to think about is when determining how to use funds, consider the amount of risk reduction and number of people who benefit from the dollar spent. You know, is it the most cost-effective approach? I can't stress enough. I mean, this is about preventing and mitigating the spread of COVID. So really think about how these measures help that way. Question came in, are expenses eligible if we add Wi-Fi access points in our facilities to enhance e-learning for students? Again, I like kind of doing this 3-part test just to get people in a certain mind frame. Is it related to COVID? Yes, it is. Is it going to be done within the time frame? Yes, it is. And then the third issue would be it should not be in your existing budget. So you can't just replace the funds. So again, bottom line, assuming that was not in your budget before, that is eligible. Reimbursement process. Actually, let me stop there real quick and see if there's any questions from chat. We'll open it up with mics at the very end, but any other questions regarding eligible costs? And we're happy to talk to people individually also. Would adding UV units to air handling be eligible? Yes, it would. So ultraviolet light is used to disinfect in air handling, and enough evidence that it's effective that could be something you could do. Okay, let me move on. Reimbursement process. So reimbursement requests will be accepted through October 15th. Projected or estimated costs for expenses after October 15th will not be accepted at this time. And then there will be there may be additional opportunities to request reimbursement in the future. So guidance on submitting requirements. The documentation should be sent to email to this address, Municipal Reimbursement, Lake County Government. The thing that we mentioned before a couple times now, please let us know if your existing submission should be used or if you'd like to submit a new application. I saw a question here for specific payroll questions. Who should we check with? And Matt, Patrice, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking they should submit it to this email address, Municipal Reimbursement at lakecountyil.gov, and then we'll route it to the right person and kind of look at it.
That's correct, Don.
Yeah. Moving down, if your files are too large, you can request access to a Dropbox site, again, through this email. And again, there's kind of a protocol as far as like how to address these emails in the subject line. It just makes it so much easier to kind of search, find them later, kind of keep track of them. So again, please use this, it's really important. Then following submittal, the request will be reviewed. And then the county may provide questions, ask for follow-up information as needed. Question came up, if your costs exceed the allotted dollar amount for our village, do you want us to submit total costs in case the dollar amount increases, or submit up to allowed reimbursement amount? My sense, and again, Matt, Patrice, correct me if I'm wrong, you could go ahead and submit more. That way, even if something's viewed as ineligible, you have kind of like that backup. And again, later it may simplify things. So,
Correct. We want them to submit everything that they have.
yep. Important consideration. So documentation submitted needs to be self-explanatory and organized with cross-reference labels. So, and I'll say this for Patrice in particular, there's a lot of extra work going on because of CRF, and she does not really have the staff to handle it all. The easier you make it, the sooner everybody gets paid. So really, organize things, do a good job. And because of that too, submissions will be returned if they're not organized, clearly labeled, or understandable. Make sure you remove sales tax, provide appropriate detailed payroll support, and prorate costs that extend past December 30th. Questions can be sent via this email address. I saw a couple questions come in, and I'm hoping I can scroll back to them. Oops, sorry there. I missed one, but one here is, if we are submitting additional expenses but not payroll expenses, do we submit a new application or just amend the old application? You would be just submitting additional, so you would submit a new application, but let them know that the old application stands. Is there still a submission online portal in the works? And Matt, can you answer that one?
Yes, there is still a portal in the works, and we will be sending out more information as we have it.
So a couple questions came in. You may be able to see on my screen. One was, we will submit more than our allotment in case something gets rejected. Will we be notified about which items were accepted and which were not considered? And yes, there'll be some sort of feedback. For our paramedics, is any additional documentation beyond payroll registers, detailing expenses by employee, and pay period needed? That's basically it. I mean, you can look at the guidance. It was definitely simplified as much as possible. There is a certification needed, but again, trying to keep it simple as possible. So it's mainly payroll registers. So let me go back. Record retention. I'm not going to spend much time here, but just want to call it out that you do need to keep things for 10 years after final payments made. Hopefully in the world of the cloud and electronic, it's not going to take up any space really. But again, do document it. I will mention here again, one of the concerns we have is, I've worked with FEMA through the years. I worked on ARA, the stimulus, and the auditors will come in 2 years down the road and ask for details. And the auditors tend to be oftentimes nitpicky and will reject things. So do keep things in order because it is a concern. So one thing here too is the record retention is applicable to prime recipients and then all subgrantees, other level of government. So you are required to meet these guidelines. The second page here calls out a couple things. One that's interesting, it's not defined, is documentation supporting the performance outcomes. And they never really called out much information on what they're looking for. But I do think it's just good to be able to point to how things helped with this money. It frankly helps long-term with Congress when they're looking at making awards in the future to be able to say, hey, we were able to help so many people, or whatever it might be. The other one here too to call out is all internal and external email, electronic submissions, communications need to be retained. Resources, I've lost my chat box, so I'll come back to that in a second. Resources out there, we provide a lot of websites. Please take a look at them. Additionally, we want to mention, again, webinar recording slides will be provided. Frequently asked questions provided. So number of resources here. I always encourage people also look at International City County Management Association. A lot of great resources there. A lot of great resources on some of these other places like Center of Disease Control and Prevention. With that, we'll switch to questions. And let's see, first of all, if I can see the chat function. And there is one there. With receipts for purchases related to COVID and only a partial amount was due to COVID, how do we submit or simplify for record purchases? I think you would just highlight the part that was COVID related, and highlighter literally can work. Do provide totals. So if there's like 5 different items that, on the receipt and 3 of them relate to COVID, do a subtotal, because that's going to be kind of the ticking and tying and going back and forth is really going to help to have it kind of like tie out neatly. Question regarding how long does it take to receive reimbursement from the county? Patrice, do you have any estimates at this time?
Sorry about that. I had trouble finding that mute button. The review process is the piece that takes a long time. Once it has been set forward for approval, it will take less than 2 weeks to reimburse, and we communicate with you when we get to that approval stage.
Thanks, Patrice. Something came in saying, can FEMA forced labor forms be used as payroll documentation process? We're really looking for original documentation rather than that summary. And then the other part of this, I'm presuming that those costs were not approved by FEMA because we can't duplicate. So again, try to look at that. Sorry, I got distracted, new question coming in. Question regarding, can we walk through the reimbursement spreadsheet? And is this spreadsheet the application? And yes, I would call it the application. I think we can walk through it. Let me just see, kind of pulling it up. It's the trick. I'll tell you what, let's stop share for a minute and find it. It shouldn't take me too long. I know where I sent it out earlier today. Okay. Once I do have it coming up on my screen. Okay, now I just need to share with everybody. Actually, one other thing here. Question came up. Somebody said we have submitted a request to FEMA. Do we simply request 25% of that FEMA reimbursement to Lake County? What documentation is needed? In a case like that, yes, the 25% is eligible. If you can just provide backup showing that what you submitted to, like the dollar amount, the summary of what went to FEMA, and what is that local share. Now I need to share my screen again. Should be. Okay. Can people see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. So part of the, I'll walk through a few parts of this just to provide a little background. I'll focus a little bit more on the payroll costs. So up towards the front, we have telework, medical, health costs. These are broken out, by the way, based on the reporting categories that have to be submitted to Treasury. So just looking for simple information, total amount. Do provide additional backup, again, as we talked about, as needed. And we were having people certify at the end of each page, just saying that you're not supplanting the budgeted items. So payroll cost. So public health and safety was kept as simple as possible. And again, just like a discretionary activity, total amount, and certify. Other costs. So these are some of the things that we talked about that may be a component, providing economic support, issuance of tax anticipation notes, etc. So those are there. So here is public safety and public health employee summary. So this is the main one you should be doing for public safety. Employee name, department. Just looking at something here. Yeah, department, job title, payroll period, salary paid during payroll period, value of benefits, and then a total for everybody. Again, looking for payroll backup on this. For other public employees, we provide a little bit more direction, and frankly, there's even some formulas built in. So we try to also label it, you can see up the top, substantially different criteria, time period criteria, substantially dedicated test, value of time worked, value of benefits, and the total being asked for reimbursement. So again, thought that was helpful to show you how it's organized. So employee name, the department, the job title, describe in some detail how the employee's tasks or duties were substantially different. Again, just a sentence or two. The payroll period. Then for substantially dedicated, we were asking people to show kind of the standard number of hours in that pay period. You know, some people have 37.5-hour work week, others have 40-hour work weeks. So whatever that is for the pay period, and again, that had come up before, is we're looking at for a pay period, it's not based on week. How much straight time is there? How much overtime is there? And then the calculation of, are they substantially dedicated? So there's a little calculation in here. We're not counting the overtime hours towards the work period hours. So again, I think that helps people with being able to qualify a little bit more as being substantially dedicated. I can say too, if you can see on my screen up at the top, there's a little formula up there. That's something that maybe will, again, help you as you move through this process. Right below it, we have an example of somebody who's not substantially dedicated. And actually, it's quite interesting seeing the total amount of pay that they're eligible for based on this example. And then exempt employees, it's slightly different because it's determining hourly pay rate. We're dividing salary by the hours for the pay period. Straight time, you know, what the salary is, overtime rate, and then calculate the value of the time for reimbursement. So again, as I mentioned before, it's very interesting because it becomes 100%, it's a lot more than if you're just doing substantially, or somebody's being assigned for a handful of hours. Value of benefits, you need to figure out the fringe benefit rate. So again, you may be able to use a percentage, or again, just calculate out what it is by the hour. Figure out what the value of the benefits is, and then again, combine the total salary with the total benefits to get yourself a total. Sick family leave, similar thing. There's a little bit here. I can jump to it for D was a person on paid sick leave, FMLA, first and last day of leave, hours due to the leave or where they left, and then the salary information, benefit information, and then the total. A little bit on telework. And keeping it pretty simple. These other ones are also relatively pretty simple. Standard protocol showing item description, why COVID related, providing an invoice, receipt number, and total price. I think those are all pretty straightforward. Let me jump back. I'm not going to stop sharing because there may be a question specifically here. Let me find the chat. Okay. Sorry, I was not able to read the chat as we were doing that. So first one, we are a special ed co-op and did not get CARES fund at first. Are we eligible now for funds? I'm not sure, and probably the best bet would be for you to submit your information via that email address that was provided, and we can get back to you on that. Second question, for a first round submission, does any action need to be taken on our part to be processed? Everything submitted fits the guidance and should not need to be revised. All you need to do is submit a note via that email saying that you want to keep your submission intact. Obviously identify where you're from, and that's sufficient. Next question, we are assuming that our SAMS number, the Government System for Award Management, and the GATA, Illinois Grants Accountability Certification must be updated and in place to receive these allocations. Is that correct? And yes, those should be kind of up to date. Question was, are the first tab summary of the other highlighted tabs? And yes, they are. Can you repeat that email, please? It's in the presentation that'll be sent out, and probably do it from memory, but that's dangerous. Where is it? 1 second here.
Don, I just put it in the chat, the municipal reimbursement at lakecountyio.gov.
Great. Okay. Let me jump back. We got Matt's notice there. Any more chats or questions? I mean, the other thing too, we can open this up via the microphones, and if people have questions, happy to kind of take a verbal question as well. Any more questions either via chat or microphone? Okay. I think that's about it. I think, you know, as you're working through this, other things may come up. Can't stress enough. Try to make it, you know, tight, reasonable, so it makes it easier to review. It will speed up the process for everybody. Matt, Patrice, any closing comments?
I do not. I will just end my comments by just saying that I appreciate everybody coming, appreciate the questions and comments. It's helping us as well. And we're working very hard to get through the submittals as we receive them. And there will be a communication that will follow up on this with the link to the recording for those that want to watch it again, and the PowerPoint as well. And Patrice, do you have any final comments?
Nope, nothing at all.
Thanks to everybody for showing up.
Okay, thanks much. Appreciate your time.